Imagine blending history, culture, and technology to create an interactive experience that helps preserve memories and share untold stories. Sounds like magic, right? It's actually the power of GIS storytelling. We're diving into the Memory Maps project that uses the tools of the GIS world to connect us to the past and present in ways you may not expect. We'll chat with the St. Mary's University Archaeology team, uncovering how they've used digital maps to tell powerful stories and make history come alive. Get ready for a journey that's as rich in data as it is in culture. Let's get started. Welcome back to Geographical Thinking. I'm Michelle Brake, and I'll be your guide as we explore ideas, stories, and conversations through the lens of geography. Joining me today are members of the St. Mary's University Archaeology Lab team that worked on the Memory Maps project. Thank you for joining me today, and welcome to Geographical Thinking, everyone. To get us started, can you each introduce yourselves, share a little bit about your background, and your role within the team? Jonathan, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Jonathan Fowler. I teach in the anthropology department at St. Mary's, and I'm an archaeologist who's really interested not only in old things in the past, but in how we can use really cool new technologies to explore that stuff and tell stories about it.
Awesome. Emily, let's go with you next.
I'm Emily Davis. I'm a recent graduate of the Anthropology Honors Program at St. Mary's University, and I've been working on the Memory Maps project for the past 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Shahryar, you're up next.
Uh, Thank you for having me, Michelle. My name is Shahryar Khan. I'm an international student from Dubai, UAE, and I'm currently studying chemical engineering at St. Mary's. And I was working as a research assistant for Jonathan using ArcGIS to rebuild Halifax from the 1800s as a 3D model.
Okay, very cool. And Wesley rounding out our group.
Yeah, I'm Wesley Weatherby. I'm the anthropology lab technician at St. Mary's and also an archaeologist. And like Jonathan, I love to play with modern technologies and toys to see what ways we can record and visualize the past.
Very cool. And I know I came across your project back in November, mid November, when the initial map was getting some traction out in the media. That's when I reached out to Jonathan to kind of say, hey, I'm interested in talking more about this. It's a really cool idea, the story map. Let's dive in further. So, Jonathan, let's take things first with the project overall. What inspired the creation of the Memory Map project, and how does it aim to preserve and share cultural stories or histories?
Right on. Okay. Well, it's a story that began, it's a project that began during the COVID years. And I suppose to give you a little bit of background, I should say that the basis of this project is a set of old maps. And this map series was published in 1878, and it's an atlas of Halifax, a very detailed, large-scale mapping of Halifax, comprehensive coverage. And I had this in my files for years. I've been using it in my teaching. And during the COVID times, when we were in lockdown and not really able to travel very far, you might remember those days. You'd walk out on the street and people would cross the road if you'd see them coming down the sidewalk at you. Kind of nervous and weird times. And I decided as part of a kind of pastime, I would take my little Hopkins maps out with me. I have a printer at home, so I printed off little black and white copies of them, and I would just walk around the city by myself, usually, with colored pencils, and I would color in on the map, the houses that remained standing from 1878, a green for still standing or whatever the buildings were, a red if they were gone. And this became a strange little pastime for me just to keep, exercise and moving around in the environment. When I got back to school, once we got back to classes, I thought, I think I'll try this with the students because I kind of enjoyed it in a strange way. And I made an assignment out of it in my Archaeology of Halifax class. And Emily and Jillian Bonner, who's not here with us today, but another one of our students, they really excelled at this. I mean, the students who did really well at this, I was able to go and get a little bit of a research grant and convert it into a real research project. And that's kind of how it began. the intention of the exercise is to measure how much of old Halifax is still standing. So we created through this project a baseline. The baseline was drawn in 1878 thanks to this atlas, this called the Hopkins Atlas. And it was really just an attempt to inventory built heritage assets from that period. Halifax is a very old city. It was founded in 1749 as a British naval station and colony. And so there's lots of old buildings here, but the pace of change in this city is incredible these days. And they're knocking down buildings left, right, and center. And actually, there's been no comprehensive effort to map these assets. It's just a poverty of riches. We just assume that they're going on forever and we keep knocking them down. So that was kind of the inspiration as well, to try to do some kind of accounting of the built heritage resource.
That tracks with how I find a lot of historical projects seem to go in the Maritimes. It's okay, great. I have an interest in it. How can we turn this into a larger project? Let's pick it up. We want to learn more about it. Let's expand that. So it's great to hear how it got off the ground, that, hey, something that you went out and you enjoyed doing as a way to help pass the time during COVID and lockdowns became a larger thing. And we got to bring into classes. I know going through like my undergrad, some of my favorite moments were like getting to look at city planning using Lego and being able to bring in those alternative ways of learning and experiencing different tasks. So I can see how maybe that would have been an enjoyable thing to go through as an activity. Emily, any thoughts on the coloring experiment project?
I remember when I took Jonathan's course, I don't know when that was, probably 2022. Yeah, back in 2022, we were each given like a different section of the City Atlas of Halifax to kind of take on as our own and color in, with the pencil crayons, and then go around the city and see what was still standing, what was demolished. And I remember I got plate K. And I was kind of disappointed with that at first because I was like, oh no, I want a really cool section of like downtown Halifax. But then I started kind of going through plate K, and that's where I lived at the time. And there was just so much history and so much that was interesting about it. Like in plate K, there's like freshwater brook that used to go through that area of the city. There's some vanished neighborhoods, which I believe we'll be talking about a little bit later. And all of this just very interesting and like rich things that I kind of got into. And I researched Fort Massey Church quite a bit for this project as well, and went deep into the history of that and learned so much. And I think that was really the jumping off point. Well, one, for the research, and my involvement in that, and also just kind of my interest in like built heritage and archaeology and the built environment.
Okay. So I think that sets a nice foundation for how did the story and the project come about. Let's move into more of the technical side. I'm wondering if we can talk more about the process of getting from those historical paper maps to digital and 3D representations like we see in the story map. I know Shahryar, Wesley, you guys were more involved in some of the technical side. Can you detail any of that?
Well, I joined in a little later on this project, and I was always fascinated by the history Halifax already has. And when I joined in Jonathan's project, I saw the maps. It was amazing, but I wanted to add some sort of like a visual aspect to it. And then I thought that 3D maps would be amazing because we see that now on Google Maps coming in, and it looks so nice that you can see all the buildings, all the cars, and everything that are in Halifax. And why can't we apply that to the maps from the 1800s? And using ArcGIS, that was possible. But I wasn't very experienced before. So using Wesley's help, Wesley came in and then gave me like a demonstration of how it works. And it's sort of a complicated software, but once you really get start working with it, it's a fascinating piece that can really create something beautiful. And yeah, that's where Wesley was really helpful in helping me out with ArcGIS.
Yeah, and at that time when you came in, Shahryar, it just so happened that I was digitizing a much older map and playing around with making that 3D. It was a map from I believe 1755 of Halifax, and it's not very well, I guess, like spatially it doesn't match up as well as it might, but I was playing around with taking that and making it 3D and sort of seeing where the palisades of the original Halifax city uh, landscape laid, and also trying to integrate that into Unreal Engine with ArcGIS. And so it was a really great touch point for Shahryar to come in
Yeah.
right when I was learning all of these new sort of visualization techniques in GIS and be able to, you know, I guess mentor him a little bit in that aspect of it.
Hmm.
Plus, I was also into games, and games like that have cities, models of cities that you can walk in, explore. That was always fascinating for me. And then if we can make Halifax into some sort of stuff like that, would be amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point with the connection to video games and how games like Assassin's Creed, where you get to really go into the depth of cities, have provided a lot of wealth of information of, oh, how are, like, we're recreating things visually in a very historically accurate way. So who knows? Maybe we'll see what Assassin's Creed, whatever number we're on, set in Halifax. Is that's the next
Exactly.
league for this?
Mhm.
Okay, but knowing that we've developed our GIS skills over time, with this project, as we've hinted at, has a wide range of different GIS tools involved. Was this a skill set that the team already had, or something that was developed during the project? Wesley, it sounds like this might be your territory.
Yeah, and this sort of brings us back to where Emily last was touching on, and that's Emily and Jillian were coloring in these maps with colored pencils, and the first step in sort of teaching them GIS was, okay, well, I'll show you how to georeference these maps. And then because all these plates weren't made to be georeferenced per se, then we had to deal with, clipping them and mosaicing them into one nice big ortho, which there was a lot of learning in that, to put it lightly, um, in the ways you might layer the different historical maps within the tools, just so that they come out looking as nice as they might. And then, once we got that part down, we decided, well, we can start digitizing these in and make real feature classes, and that's really where, what we see on the memory maps story map really began, was when we started digitizing them into real polygons so that they could be overlaid and really mesh with the modern cityscape.
And then Emily and Shahryar, how was it learning the various tools and things on the fly as you're working on this project? Were we looking at like a steep learning curve? I know personally when I first started GIS, the first few months were the hardest.
Yeah, I would say like I came into this project with absolutely no knowledge of GIS at all. I didn't even know what it was, to be honest. And then I'm just kind of like thrown in here. Not exactly thrown in. Wesley was very good at teaching us how to do it. And to be completely honest, I would have been lost without him. I can't even tell you how many times I've gone to him thinking I completely fudged the entire project and ruined everything by like pressing one wrong button or something like that. But yeah, I think it was a really good like learning experience. And I'm really grateful to have like developed this skill set. But I will say it was also very painstaking, if I'm being honest. Very tedious, but also very interesting because it's a very finicky thing. Like Wesley was saying, georeferencing these historical maps over top of a very like a ever changing city, really, because we used control points to kind of set the maps down on the modern landscape with modern property boundary lines, which have relatively remained the same over time. Yeah, you need to be very careful with that because
Yeah.
it's very easy to throw off the overlay and have warping happen.
Yep, I'm very familiar, having done my fair share of georeferencing over time. You're so certain that you've got it right. You click a control point, you're like, okay, let's set it. You're like, no. Now it's like, for the most part, you're like 75% there, but like one corner is like really warped. You've got like some bending going on. Now it's all out of place. So I understand those headaches as they come. Okay, but Shahryar, how was your experience with learning some of this?
Yeah, same as Emily's. I mean, initially I never knew about ArcGIS, and since I started working on this project, I found out, it's a software because I'm in engineering, and
Mhm.
now that I'm a student and I'm also like looking, going into the job market, it's everywhere. Everybody wants you to have GIS experience, and I never knew about this before. So it was a great learning curve for me, and Wesley was very helpful because it's a complicated piece of software. It sometimes gets to you, and you think you've got it, but you go home and you're blank, and then you email Wes. Like I've been always emailing Wesley like, hey, now I don't know what to do next. Can we set up a meeting and then talk about it further? And yeah, it keeps going back and forth until you get it right. But over the months, I got better at it.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and great to hear that there is that camaraderie and teamwork element to it. But I want to hear Jonathan's thoughts on this as well, of what came first, the maps or the GIS. I suspect I know the answer, but in a chicken and egg situation, I want to
Well,
hear what you
just as these guys were saying, we were working on paper first, so it was a very analog process. And then we moved it into the GIS. But I just love hearing what these guys are saying because it's sort of the magic of this process, that it is a research activity, and to some extent, it's got an embedded within it a sort of advocacy, a heritage advocacy element.
Mhm.
But fundamentally, this is a learning exercise. We're university people. We're in the academy. We're there to learn, and you know that's kind of part of the DNA of this whole operation. So just gratifying to hear that. It's a little challenging for us. I mean, just speaking personally about our program in anthropology, we're embedded in the arts, and we're not a geography department. We don't have a computer lab. We're fortunate to have Wesley around, and as these guys have said, he's an invaluable resource for this kind of thing. And Wesley is actually very, very skilled in this area. And you know, when I was a student coming up, and mind you, I'm a lot older than this crowd, but GIS was a thing. It was just becoming a thing. But I kind of missed the train. It
Mhm.
kind of came up just as I was coming through. And therefore, I've had to circle back and obtain whatever training I could muster just through these informal means. So I consider myself to be dangerous with GIS, but I'm not formally trained. And therefore, I can show people the ropes, but it's really having somebody like Wesley around he really knows the guts of this kind of stuff that has allowed this to happen. So, yeah, with all that said, we moved this thing along. We kind of scuffled through, and we ended up creating what I think is a viable first project in this story maps system. And just thrilled that Shahryar and Emily and others who've been part of it have learned along the way, because really that's the whole point.
And I know that is a common way of discovering GIS is, okay, I need a tool to carry out a project in another field. It's intersectionality. We like to see it as everyone starts to embrace it and use it. And
Yeah.
GIS is a tool. It can be used anywhere. Let's see how you guys can use it.
Absolutely. And I think really ultimately there's no substitute just for noodling around with the software. I mean, just spending the time, making the mistakes. No, it doesn't blow up. Save your work, go back
Yes,
to that
David.
previous version. But time spent at the coal face, so to speak, is
Mhm.
really rewarding.
Okay. Thinking about all of the time you've spent in the project and learning, as well as learning about the history that goes along with the maps and the areas that you've been looking at, can you share any personal stories or moments that stood out to you while working on the project, and any particular memory or story? Why did it resonate with you? I know we hinted at maybe some vanishing city talk, if we want to start there.
Yeah, well, maybe very briefly, I'll just start this ball rolling. But one of the things that we can do with this spatial data, the mapping, is link it not only to places in the modern landscape, but also to personalities, which I find makes it very human very quickly. And there are lots of neighborhoods in the city of Halifax that no longer exist. That famously we have a place like Africville, the historic black community in the north end of the city, which was wiped out by the municipality in the post-war period. We also have lots of other neighborhoods that have just been remodeled. They're gone. And when you get into the mapping, Hopkins, for example, from the 1870s, you can see those places, but you can also collate that data. We haven't really done this very much yet, but I'd like to in the future. You can collate that data with city directories. Back in those days, they didn't have phone books because they didn't really have phones. So they had these little directories with all the addresses of people. And if you wanted to send them a little note, I guess some boy would run with a note and give it to, knock on the door, give you a note. But these city directories allow us to effectively repopulate these lost neighborhoods and find out what kind of people were living in different places. And you can do all sorts of really cool social analysis and storytelling out of that. So for me, to answer your question, just getting to know, in inverted commas, the people who used to live in these places, some of which are completely remodeled and gone, parking lots now. I always find that really compelling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other moments? I know, Emily, you'd hinted at some elements of the vanishing cities that were interesting within your work.
Yeah, exactly. One little piece of history that I've kind of taken a liking to, and I've learned about during this project, is what I kind of like to call the superstore suburb. Um, it's a vanished neighborhood that was on Barrington Street, where the superstore is right now. It's just under the parking lot and kind of to the south, I believe, a little bit as well. And this was like an area largely populated by like blue collar workers, many of who worked at the nearby industrial sites like the gas works, as well as the Royal Engineers Yard. And Jonathan was mentioning the directories and such, and I kind of took a look at that as well. And that's how we kind of know that they were mainly these workers living there. And it kind of really resonated with me because this was in the plate that I was looking at for the school project. And I lived in this area, so I always walked by the superstore. This is where I got my groceries. That's what I associated it with. And I was really just astounded, I guess, to learn that there were people and their families that would have called the area home in the past. And I really had no clue about the history of it all. And since then, I've kind of looked into this area a little bit since I was intrigued. And I believe that a lot of the homes were likely demolished as a result of the ocean terminals project in the early 20th century. And what's unfortunate about it is we still haven't found any pictures of it either, which I would really like to see, and I know Jonathan would as well.
So I'll keep my eyes out on any churchyard sales that pop up because you never know what's hidden, like some of the books. I'll keep my eyes peeled just in case. But thinking from vanished cities to the other side of maybe even preserved areas, have we seen anything like that within the maps that you've been looking at? I don't know, Wesley or Shahryar, if you have anything there.
Yeah, I mean, just to the west of that superstore, you can find a Sobeys on Queen Street, and under that there's a essentially a brook called Freshwater Brook that it still flows, and this is something that Jonathan shows us, shows incoming students in various classes. I believe the Archaeology of Halifax, that you can hear it when there's heavy rainfall. You can hear that brook through the drains, and if you follow that brook right up to its headwaters, which would be in the Citadel, you get to essentially where the skate park is now. And I spent a lot of time at the skate park when I was younger, and I didn't realize that the old section of the Halifax skate park on the Commons is it's actually partially preserving the shore of an old pond that was there. And
Okay.
finding that out was pretty cool, because again, like Emily, I associated this place with one activity, and then you look back in time and it's like wow, it wasn't even land, it was water. You know, being in that old skate park, you're essentially waist deep in an old pond.
Yeah. And I think that's cool to, or interesting really, to see both sides of it of what have we seen disappear and what do we see as the maps help us preserve that record, but also what have we preserved and the maps help us identify that in modern times. I guess rounding us out, Shahryar, anything that stood out to you, any memories or stories from the work?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new here, but
Yeah.
one personal moment for me was how rich the history in the city is. Just finding out about that was very fascinating. And yeah, I was amazed by the wealth of stories and memories that are tied to these places. And this project's ability to bring those histories to life was incredibly, rewarding and gave me a deeper appreciation of the area's heritage.
Hmm.
But about a story, I mean, there's this building which is named the Crane,
Hmm.
and that was after a crane fell over it. So that was something that was nice to learn about. And there's many stories here and there that I keep finding out during the whole project, and yeah, it's just pretty cool for me to learn.
Yeah, I feel like the crane is a great example of like the modern history that will tell people of, oh, remember when the crane fell? It is still one of those infamous stories of Halifax for anyone who's
Absolutely,
wondering.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that goes right to the point. The nature of humans is to create place and to create stories. And heritage, today's today's events are tomorrow's heritage in a sense. Like some of them are at least. And yeah, when you look at a city closely over time, you can see it forming, and that's a really classic example. Shahryar, did the crane fall just before you arrived? Were you in Halifax at the time?
I mean, I was after, so
Okay, I'm not
yeah,
suggesting
that's
you
when I
had anything
learned.
to do with it, but
Yeah.
yeah, no,
So I've been here for 2 years, and it was after, and it was cool to know.
yeah, recent history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, it's very recent, but it's one of those things that if you ask people about Halifax or you go on Reddit and you see people referencing the crane, people just know what it is now.
I thought it was really funny and kind of punchy that the developers named the building the Crane. I thought that exhibited a
Exactly.
really good sense of humor, and that's something I like to see in a city.
Yeah. And now I know looking at the maps, one of the stories that immediately came to my mind, and I want to hear whether this falls in line with what you found out or maybe it doesn't, is that a lot of the buildings have shown a lot of change between 1878 and now. Specifically, a lot of them have been demolished. I'm wondering because my initial thought was, oh yeah, of course, the Halifax explosion. Of course, that's why there's so many buildings that aren't here anymore, but then I'm like, well, wait, how much of an impact did that really have? So I need to know. Did we see this big change because of the Halifax explosion, or was it a lack of policy preserving buildings, or something else entirely?
Really, the answer to that is it's a combination of factors.
Okay.
There's no one overarching determinate reason for all the attrition, but I will say that development has played a very large role. Although the Halifax explosion did cause a lot of the damage in the city, much of the devastation was limited to mostly the very north end of Halifax near the water. This area is where buildings would have been completely destroyed, and in 1878, it wasn't very built up in this area either. There's actually a plan you can find on the Nova Scotia Archives website called Plan Showing Devastated Area of Halifax City, if there's any interest in that. And Dalhousie University also created a digital map showcasing this as well. In terms of policy, I don't believe that preservation was prioritized very much in the city until the late 80s when it
Mhm.
became possible to register heritage buildings to give them their official status. Once this was implemented, though, I'm sure it made quite a difference. Something worth mentioning is that in the 1960s, Halifax carried out a large urban renewal project,
Mhm.
which essentially was quote unquote slum clearance to rid the downtown area of undesirable homes that weren't really appealing to the eye or the more upper class individuals residing in that area or going into that area during the day. This resulted in many families being displaced for a period of time until housing became available for them. And one area where this was carried out is where Scotia Square was built in downtown Halifax.
Okay.
So on Albemarle Street. There's some very good papers written on this and many pictures documenting it as well, as each home was photographed before being demolished. It's worth mentioning as well that areas of the city have suffered from fires and things like that, like on Barrington Street in the late 19th century.
Yep.
While events like that have definitely impacted attrition rates, the bulk of it can be attributed to development, though. There's an interesting statistic that I learned of from a 2019 report by the Heritage Advisory Committee that says between 2009 and 2019, 30% of the heritage buildings in the downtown core were demolished as a result of development, just in that decade. And currently there is policy to protect heritage buildings, but only if they're registered, and that only goes so far in itself.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, it's pretty shocking that a 10-year period in my lifetime, our lifetimes, has seen such a large reduction in what heritage properties we're seeing downtown. And I guess it makes sense having seen things like the new convention center go up. There's been so much change in the downtown core that looking around, yeah, I can see where that statistic actually lives. But it's surprising to hear how large of a number it actually is. But glad to hear that it is a combination of things.
Yeah, you got it. The change is real. The change is bracing the pace of change. And what we wanted to do with this effort is to kind of introduce some numbers and accounting to this process, because there's really not been such a thing done. We've just sort of been on autopilot here. And, we talk about the value of heritage. It shows up in brochures and advertisements. Come to Halifax, and there's all these pictures of beautiful old buildings and architecture in Nova Scotia generally. And yet we're just blasting away at it without really knowing what stock we have in this, built heritage asset, how much of it we have. And that report that Emily just cited was one that was just triggered by a discussion, and it only pertained to the downtown core. Really, there had been no, as I say, holistic accounting, and it's long overdue.
And I'm interested to see and hear more about where is this going in the future. So are there plans to expand the projects for the memory maps? Are we looking at ideas of exploring the intersection of GIS with cultural narratives, with new ideas? What's next? What can we expect? Other than maybe documenting the crane.
Well, we definitely want to map forward and back in time and see the city develop over time. But we've also got a number of thematic map projects on our plate. And actually, Wesley, you and I, probably more than anyone else in the team so far, have been working a lot at the old burying ground, for instance. Maybe you could, fill them in on that a little bit, and anything else that comes to mind.
Yeah, so the old burying grounds project has really been fascinating. And again, just like this project, it started with classwork. So students in one of Jonathan's courses went out and surveyed and mapped out by hand at first.
We always start with
of-
clipboards and pencils, don't we?
Yeah, so by hand, they mapped out all of the stones in the old burying grounds, associating names with them. And I believe there was the research component of that project where students would take a name and sort of go with it to learn what they could about that person. And out of that came a realization that, hey, there's a lot of really cool information that we could collate into one project here and do it spatially. So over the next, I guess, few years following that initial classwork, Jonathan, me, and some others, like Vanessa Smith from Nova Scotia Museum now, went out and we surveyed with GNSS all of the stones on just 2 sides for all of the headstones and then 4 sides for the table stones. But at that point we realized that, hey, let's sort of make this relational, and we can add real data and the information on the stones to it. And then I made a quick a field maps, at the time it was Collector app,
Mhm.
that we could go out and record some stuff. And then in a class that I taught, that Emily was actually in, we went out, and with a team of 18 students, we got about 40% of the graveyard done in one class period, which was incredible, because before that, it was painstaking to go out and just record this by hand. And using the Collector app, we were also able to get photos, so we could sort of cross reference visually the information that was recorded with the photo. And yeah, from there we're looking to amalgamate that with the old burying grounds records, so that then we can really start digging in more. That project's just sort of, we're just getting to that step now, and it's really exciting because soon we're going to be able to actually dig into that data and do real research. But archaeology, just in general, is inherently a spatial and cultural research endeavor. So, like, geospatial data lends itself to cultural narratives so well. And with all of the new tools that are coming out on ArcGIS Online, I was talking to Jonathan yesterday actually about how interesting it is that back when I started GIS, to get 3D models onto ArcGIS Online was almost unfathomable. And now it's really easy. Like an archaeological project that we're undertaking down in La Have in Nova Scotia at a 17th century fort site. Um, the excavations we've done there and the drone surveys we've done, we can create 3D models of them and put them on ArcGIS Online, so we can share that information with the research team. And that's really, really helpful to be able to see all of that sort of spatially in the way it relates in 3D. And there's just so many ways that GIS intersects with these cultural narratives that it's hard to really pinpoint one thing.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of places that we're going to be able to see in the future. Which sounds like it's a question of, okay, what's next? How do we pick the next idea? But if people want to keep up on what's next or the next steps in the project, how can they keep up to date or even get in touch?
Well, yeah, thanks. We've got a website that we use as kind of like a landing page for this project. It's just called mapsofmemory.com. So that's one way to do it. You can also find us at the anthropology department at St. Mary's University in Halifax. That's, I guess you'll include the links, Michelle, on
We will in the
the
show
show
notes
notes. I
for
really
sure.
appreciate it. And yeah, so we'll give you some contact info. And if anyone out there takes an interest in our work, great. Would like to share their work, also great. And potentially, if there's opportunity to collaborate in this kind of stuff in the future, we're game. It's something we like to do.
Amazing. And I look forward to hearing more about things in the future. And hopefully we'll get some people reaching out so that we can see what they're doing as well. Thank you again all for joining me today. I hope we've had a good time together, and we'll see what's next. What are the next stories?
You got it. Thanks a lot for your interest. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, and that's a wrap for today's journey into the world of GIS storytelling. We've seen how powerful maps and memories can be when combined, from preserving culture to sharing untold stories. A huge thank you again to St. Mary's University's Archaeology Lab team here for joining us and giving us a glimpse into the incredible work that you're doing. If you're looking for more information about the technical side of GIS, check out the Spatial Report podcast, where Mark dives into the latest and greatest in the world of GIS. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep thinking geographically.